Aria of Queen Hildelith. The stretch of water known as the Emerald Banks ran from the heart of NihtWyrtha's western coastline and swept in a long arc around the southern shores, skirting the edges of the vast southern marshlands. The banks earned their name from the vivid, unnatural green hue of the Geofon sea in this region, an emerald sheen that seemed to glow even under storm clouds. The outer edges of the banks were marked by a broken line of small islands, jagged, cruel shapes rising from the surf like the teeth of some sunken beast. Locals called them the worm teeth. Atop one of the tallest peaks stood NihtWyrtha, its fortress walls sheathed in black iron, weathered by endless storms. To the eye of an outsider, these islands might appear to be the coastline itself, but in truth, they were the last remnants of great mountains, drowned long ago when the seas rose. Beneath the emerald waters, the ocean floor plunged in sheer cliffs, dropping 1 to 2 miles into the abyss. The worm-teeth peaks acted as natural breakers, though ancient tales whispered that in the troughs between storms, sailors could glimpse the low valleys of the sunken mountains, shadowed and silent in the depths. Following the curve of the coast, the banks led eastward, merging into the wide estuary of the Selforwisk, the Silverwash, a vast mouth of tidal rivers where the city of Suthihil sat astride the cliffs. The black-hulled ironclad Leotbora turned its prow into the misty waters of the Selforwisk, steaming hard against the rising tide. Ahead, across the horizon, pillars of smoke drifted up from the city of Suthihil, dark stains against the silvered sky. Edric adjusted the focus of his sighting monocular, squinting toward the distant cliffs. "The docks appear intact," he reported, lowering the device, "but I see impacts in the heart of the city." Beside him, Queen Hildelith tightened the strap, fixing her cuirass into place with a sharp tug. She moved with irritation barely concealed beneath her poise. "Any further information on what exactly is happening?" she asked, voice clipped. Edric handed the monocular to a waiting tech adept and scanned the bruised sky overhead. "Running assumption is a demonic incursion," he said grimly. "But truthfully, I don't think anyone knows for certain. Rumors are circulating that Arch-Magos Voratrix is dead." Hildelith began plaiting her graying hair into long corded braids, twisting and pinning them expertly to the back of her head. "And why," she murmured dryly, "do I find the rumors of her death hard to believe?" She turned to her assembled Hearthguard, resplendent in their burnished plate, and gave a single nod. "Make ready," she ordered. Edric stepped forward, lowering his voice in caution. "Your Majesty, would it not be wiser to avoid the capital? If this truly is the beginning of an invasion, we might make better speed sailing for Weezier under the void shields." Hildelith's mouth tightened into a faint, knowing smile. She folded the next plate neatly into place. "That is my capital," she said. "I will defend it." Edric hesitated. "King Ecbald thought the same, my lady. He died there." Hildelith let out a laugh, low and sharp like the crack of a bowstring. "My brother was a fool, but your counsel is sound." She paused, glancing toward the distant burning skyline. "He tried to hold the old fort with a handful of men and broken defenses against a horde. I see no fleet hanging in the heavens, and no army waiting at my gates." Leotbora's engines howled as the ironclad plowed forward through the waves, its armored prow slicing the mist. Edric gave a short, resigned nod. "Aye, my lady." Leotbora charged through the sea, no longer fighting the tide. The Leotbora swayed as the swell turned beneath her, its engines humming at full strength. Hildelith remembered the first time she had taken the ship out to sea, the first true ironclad of her people. She had set sail with dreams of revolution and renewal. Instead, she met Wulfgar. Its black hull bore the scars of age and war, proud but weary. No gulls circled its masts now. The air was too hot, too thick with ash. Queen Hildelith stood alone upon the weathered foredeck, her back turned to the ceremonial banners that still fluttered defiantly above her private quarters. In her gloved hands she held a long silver javelin, slowly polishing the shaft with a strip of white cloth already stained with oil and soot. Each pass was mechanical, methodical, the rhythm of ritual, because her mind would not rest. Beyond the prow, across the darkening waters, her capital city burned. The entire horizon glowed. Towers once lit by cathedral lamps were now engulfed in warp fire. Streets where children once played now echoed with the laughter of demons. She watched as a macro shell arced slowly across the sky and struck near the garden walls. The explosion bloomed like a flower, a perfect, symmetrical sorrow. She didn't blink. Her javelins were lined beside her, neatly arranged, each one etched with the name of a past victory. Fiskport, Emerald Banks, all from the Orc War. She remembered Wulfgar's voice on that day of first contact with the Imperium, low, grim, but full of something rare, belief. He hadn't begged, he hadn't commanded, he had simply shown her the truth. And she, younger then, perhaps wiser, had listened. She had acted, and now her world was full of people she barely recognized. Refugees from shattered forges, ragged pilgrims, weapon sellers, rogue traders, smuggled tech priests, unlicensed miners. The old noble lines had frayed. Unity came only through coin and blood. And still, somehow, she had held it. Until now. Now the daemons had come. From beneath Nithelm, they had slithered up through the cracks in the world, and now they flung themselves across the void at her city with joy. She paused, hand resting on the javelin's shaft. Had she done the right thing? Inviting the Imperium, the Mechanicus? When she had met Archmagos Daemia Voratrix, she had felt they were kindred spirits, women of ideas and vision. She had changed her world. She had led her people into the Imperium. Now it was the heart of the Arcana Inclusium. But the Astartes? That had been different. The Imperium wanted to raise a chapter here, to turn her world into a fortress, a forge for warriors. Was that the future she had envisioned? She had always suspected Wulfgar of intending on replacing her, abolishing the monarchy. Would Wulfgar understand what she had become now? Was he even still alive? She had been told NihtWyrtha had been hit first. But no. As she watched her capital burn, she understood at last. Only the Astartes could truly save it now. Wulfgar had been right, as had Voratrix. Her world must bear the task of raising a Sos Marine Chaopter, but the world must survive long enough to reach that pinnacle. And so she would go to war again. Not because she had to. Not because others wouldn't, but because if she, the queen, the very image of worth and sovereignty, would not stand and fight, then who would? Hope itself might die, and she would not let that happen, even if it meant her death. At least her wounds would be at the front. The Leotbora groaned beneath her, alive, still loyal, still hers. Another shell screamed down in the distance. She picked up the last javelin and placed it on her back. Edric handed the tiller to a midshipman and unplugged his interface, letting the cable swing free. A shell landed in the water alongside, showering him in sea spray as he made his way to the lower deck. Hildelith stood there with her white-armored Hearthguard, a silver javelin in one hand, 2 more strapped across her back, and a seax in her other hand. She nodded to him. Edric wasn't about to argue with her. She had been the same during the Orc War, though much younger then, bringing the Leotbora up the Silverwash to aid her brother, then fighting her way back down with survivors of the siege while orcs in rocket packs rained from the sky. She was one of those personalities that would not be talked down. Beornwulf was very much like her in his own way, though not a trait her son, Prince Hioruwulf, truly possessed. The prince was all for keeping to the shadows and striking when ready. Beornwulf, on the other hand, always charged headlong into battle, regarding any obstacle as something to be smashed through rather than maneuvered around. Adric drew his Serpenta pistol and his seax, while his Wigathane from the crew readied around him. They nodded to each other, wordless in their understanding. The discordant horn. The last few leagues to the city gave the ironclad a second wind, certainly surprising the gunners manning the bastion that protected the harbor. Infected, corrupted, or simply mad, they had turned sides early in the fighting, indentured conscripts from grimness, mostly. Cultists loyal to Ylaxa had overpowered their Mechanicus overseers and turned the bastion's guns against the ships sheltering in the harbor. Ylaxa the Ribbon stood on the catwalks now of the bastion, directing the corrupted fire, while the gunners below cheered their newfound freedom, blind to the long tendrils growing from the weapons into their flesh, binding them forever to their guns. Those few who realized the horror unfolding tried to resist, but only descended faster into madness. Ylaxa stood atop the catwalks of the bastion, overlooking the long wharfs and laughing as he directed fire onto any ship that dared attempt escape. When the battle cannons of the bastion could do little damage against the heavier armored ships, she would reach out with her mind's eye to link with the moon above. Unit 782F would dutifully respond, firing her macro cannon downward. The delay caused by the moon's distance meant the shells often missed, but Ylaxa did not mind. Each blast summoned fresh daemons into the material world, who flooded the escaping ships in gleeful swarms. Every time hope was torn from the mortal's grasp, every time safety was snatched away, their despair fed the swirling tempest of madness. Ylaxa watched now as a fresh macro shell impacted a wharf. A small sloop laden with women and children pitched into the estuary. Some managed to swim or wade back to shore, but the daemons, freshly spawned and hungering for terror, descended upon them. The screams of the dying and the desperate pleas for mercy filled the air, forming a triumphant chorus, the perfect accompaniment to the aria the daemon captain was composing in her mind. The air inside the battery bastion shimmered with heat and powder smoke. Gunners, both demonic and mortal thrall, moved in jerking rhythm under Ylaxa's gaze, their movements as much dance as duty. Shells clanged into loaders. Vox relays crackled like distant applause. Outside, the sea howled and the distant spires of Suthi Hill flickered with firelight. Ylaxa stood at the high balcony, arms raised as if conducting an orchestra. Her long, many-jointed fingers twitched with elegance as each gun barked in time. She turned slowly, casting her gaze down across the fortified decks and charred docks that fanned out below her. Each salvo of the bastion's macro batteries was a note, each thunderous detonation a chord in the grand aria she now composed. It was not the melody she had hoped to sing, not the sultry seduction of street-level slaughter, but it would suffice. Artillery was a brutal instrument, yes, but one with surprising range for expression. A runner approached, pale and shaking, the warp-blooded courier barely able to form words as he bowed. He received it, my lady. The bringer of silence marches now. Ylaxa smiled. So Xylaphus had heard her call. Good. All we must do, she whispered, is hold the harmony. Let the grand crescendo build. She looked out over the silver waves of the estuary, noticing the tide had turned, and the burning carcass of the lower city, then raised a hand to the signal horn. With a single gesture she ordered the moon batteries, long-slumbering Mechanicus-held siege cannons now corrupted and turned to chaos to resume their fire. The heavens screamed. Mako cannon shells lanced down from orbit, slamming into ridges and ravines with apocalyptic force, melting towers and flinging squads of defenders into the sky as ash. She could almost feel the moon above itself groan beneath the recoil, through her link to Unit 782F, tides shifting unnaturally under the violence of its own voice. Ylaxa stepped back from the edge and placed one slender claw against her throat. She could feel it, the rhythm, the building tension, the moment before the drop. All voices aligned, she said aloud, to no one and everyone. Now, Xylaphus, let your silence sing. Then a horn? What? Not part of the symphony he was composing. The percussion thump of his battle cannon, then the rattle of heavy stubbers, followed by the wind section of autocannon and falling shells, then added in the choir, screams and pleas for mercy. But a horn? That was not right. Ylaxa looked over the edge of the bastion into the miscellany of shipping below. Which boat was offending her pointed ears? Which of these dreadful musicians was spoiling his opera? This was a masterpiece. She would not have it spoiled. Then she looked behind. There, speeding toward the port from the open sea, was an ironclad, a large, black ship cutting through the surf like a blade. How annoying. She shouted at his daemons, who whipped the gunners, and slowly the battle cannons began to turn on their rusting barbette mounts, shifting to aim toward the incoming ironclad. A shell flew in from the sea, blasting one of the cannons apart in its mount. The crew turned to flesh and ash, the demons nearby splashing into purple jelly that evaporated with a hiss. The other guns fired, but the speed of the ironclad threw the gunners' aim off, and the shells landed uselessly in the ship's wake. That would not do. This was all wrong. The ironclad returned fire, shells raking the outer seaward jetty. Dozens of dancing daemons were splashed into unreality as the ancient stonework exploded in shards and dust. The bastion launched another salvo, shells splashing into the sea around the black-hulled warship, but the ship still charged on. defiantly. Ylaxa jabbed a clawed finger at the ship. "I will make any one of you who hits that ship a Daemon Prince," she roared. The gunners frantically turned their cannons. One of the three exploded outright as a shell from NihtWyrtha slammed into the bastion. Ylaxa waved away dust and falling body parts, growling in anger. She leaned out from the shattered battlement, expecting to see the ironclad in ruins, but instead found the black ship was too close now, too close for the bastion's guns to lower their barrels far enough to fire. She banged his clawed fist into the wall, cracking the ancient masonry and sending chips flying, then drew her sword with a screech of metal. "I'll do it myself," she snarled, stomping off to find if the stairs down still existed. The NihtWyrtha shuddered, oars extending from her port side to dig into the sea. The ship turned sharply, presenting its side to the jetty where hordes of daemons waited in anticipation of battle. Heavy bolters and autocannons raked the daemon ranks as boarding ramps slammed into the stone wall. Edric raced up his plank, but saw Hildelith reach the top of her own ramp first, typical of the woman. She landed on the wharf, bladed boots digging into the ichor-slicked ground. A Seek slash took down a demonette that tried to swing at her. She ducked under a second demon's strike, but her attempt to skewer it missed, the creature moving too fast. She swung at a third, but this one also danced away, laughing with its kin. A tall daemon, its claws like scythes, moved in to strike. But Hildelith knew she could not match the daemons in speed. That was never the point. She was a figurehead, a rallying point for her warriors. Killing one daemon was a bonus, and a lucky one. She threw herself to the floor as the tall demon lunged. It looked surprised, and then the Hearthguard behind her unleashed their flamers. The daemons boiled and shrieked in fire. Edric was facing two daemons who had avoided the flames but whose attention was distracted. He did not let the opportunity go to waste. The daemon spears were their main weapons. He shot out the hooved feet of both creatures, then collapsed to the ground as one grabbed his leg with a clawed pincer. His plate buckled under the force, pain shooting up his leg, but he shoved his Serpenta pistol into the daemon's face and blasted it apart. He yanked his Seeks free and sank it into the arm of the second demon, causing it to stagger back and fall off the edge of the platform into the harbor with a shriek. The NihtWyrtha's guns fired almost point blank into the flank of the bastion. The entire tower began to tilt, slipping into the sea, taking its gun crews with it, now tethered to the weapons by tendrils, unable to escape. As the ironclad rose high on a wave of displaced water rushing under its hull, water flooded the harbor, carrying many of the demons into the ocean's embrace. The waters churned thick with inky purple ichor. As the flames cleared, Edric and Queen Hildelith led their men toward the breached wall. Edric ordered his sailors along the many jetties, rallying scattered survivors, sailors who had been clinging to their last vestiges of hope, only to see victory rise from the sea with the arrival of their queen. Blocking the wharf was a towering figure, a greater daemon, who fumed in anger at the loss of its orchestra. Ylaxa pointed a clawed hand at them, its voice a shuddering scream across reality. "I will make a trumpet out of you. I will hollow you out and make your mouth scream my song for eternity." Edric took aim and fired. His men, seeing him stand firm, fired alongside him. For a moment, he felt his mind rebel. The stories were true. He was looking at an actual demon. Before now, he had acted on training and instinct. Now, faced with the truth, fear threatened to consume him. But he stood his ground, firing steadily, and his men saw and followed his lead. Closer to the monster, Queen Hildelith stood, looking up at the towering creature. If she felt any fear, none could tell. She was a queen, and her duty outweighed terror or madness. Ylaxa cast a pall of pink fire at her, but the Hearthguard locked their shields together, the flames sparking harmlessly off their interlocked defense. Hildelith stepped out of the shield wall and hurled a silver javelin. The daemon raised a shield. To her, nothing but a target shield for deflecting blows, though to a man it would have been a boarding shield. The javelin struck the shield, sparking, and the shield boiled, melting away as electricity coursed through it. Ylaxa dropped the shield, shaking her smoldering hand. "Clever," it said, mocking. Hildelith pulled a second javelin from her back and sent it flying. The daemon, ready this time, laughed and snatched the javelin midair, holding it triumphantly. The weapon crackled in a burst of electronic static. Ylaxa's clawed hand burst and melted away, the javelin falling from its grasp to stick upright into the stone at its feet. Ylaxa howled in rage. "How dare you!" she bellowed. "I will not only make a trumpet from your hollowed chest, but a harp of your nerves. I will play music on your screaming soul forevermore." The third javelin struck the daemon full in the belly. It staggered backward, impaling its foot on the javelin still sticking from the ground. Electricity coursed through its body, transfiguring its flesh, tearing it apart from the outside in. Ylaxa held a surprised face as the electricity melted, it wounded flesh from reality. Hildelith stepped over the dissolving body, paying it no heed. Her Hearthguard moved ahead of her, engaging the daemons who, only moments earlier, had been laughing behind their master. Now, they skittered back. Edric looked along the line of ships still afloat. 3 burned from stem to stern, leaving only 6 seaworthy. Firing and the chattering of daemons, once thought to be a nightmare, now proving commonplace, indicated the queen and her guards were pushing the host back into the city. Edric looked across the estuary to the far bank, eyes scanning the length of the starport. The facility was still intact, for now, though 3 car baths were lined up closest to the wharf where they'd been taking on grain. The grain ships sat low in the water, overloaded and abandoned. One had already capsized, its hull breached and spilling cargo into the oily tide. The spacecraft nearby were worse, their hulls scorched and skeletal at the midsection, smoke curling from rents in their flanks. There were no daemons visible on that side of the long-span bridge crossing the estuary. That fact made him more nervous than reassured. He scanned the skies. Where were the fighters? No support, no air cover, just silence. The starport had 2 full squadrons stationed, fast atmospheric interceptors, but there was no sign of them. No contrails, no strafing runs, only the distant thunder of orbital cannons raining ruin on the upper districts, and the occasional flicker of re-entry flares far beyond the city. Edric tightened his grip on the railing, knuckles pale beneath his gloves. He had the sinking feeling he was about to find out why the air had gone quiet. Edric moved to the wharf. A group of civilians sheltering behind a bathyscaphe that had been pierced by a huge claw ran out. He waved for them to move to the clear jetty being secured by his men. From the direction of the jetty, a group of Wigathane soldiers moved up. They had been holding a transport ship piled high with bales of hay. The commissar leading them saluted him. Edric returned the Aquila. "We saw the Leotbora," the commissar said, almost disbelieving. "Could not believe it was real." "The first of many," Edric said. "The entire fleet is ordered here. Leotbora was so close out of luck more than anything. I was inspecting its cadets. And you?" The commissar removed his cap and wiped ichor and sweat from his face. "I was taking these men." He pointed his chainsword towards the Wigathane troopers, then to the starport. "We were on our way to Thermenda Gat station when all this started. We came across the bridge to help." He pointed with his bolt pistol to a civilian sloop charred but afloat. "The cargo ship is full of civilians." Edric looked after the queen who was leading the Hearthguard to the break in the harbor wall. He had a realization that he was probably the highest-ranking officer in the city now. He addressed the commissar firmly. "Where is the harbor master?" The commissar shook his head. "No idea, Lord. He would have been in the bastion, but—" He did not finish the statement. "Eorl of the starport?" he asked in hope. The Eorl of the starport was also the Eorl of the city. The commissar shook his head slowly and added, "He died well, Lord. He protected the hangars so the pilots could get to their craft." "Ah!" said Edric. "And where are the fighters?" The commissar pointed eastwards. There were reports of a host of Xenos heading across the march from NihtWyrtha. Edric nodded. "Then I am declaring myself here Toga. I'm making you harbor master. Get the civilians loaded into whatever you can, then get the ships out of the bay. The Navis Whelmer Wigathine will need these docks clear to land their troops. My men will secure the bridge so out forces can get through." The commissar saluted sharply and moved off, barking orders. A skip in his step. Edric posted 2 more of his men as adjutants with a vox, then followed the sounds of fighting. Around Queen Hildelith, The remnants of the city's defenders rallied. Naval crew, beastmen, armed civilians. These last were survivors of the Battle of the Warren that had heard the Queen's horns and seen the royal banner, even a dozen or so Mechanicus servitors that had somehow shaken off the demonic corruption and followed along. "Form up," Edric roared, waving his Sikhs in a wide arc. "For the Queen! For NihtWyrtha!" The few troops still undecided followed orders and raced after the main force, surging through the broken outer walls. The breach in the outer city wall was wide enough for a dozen men to march abreast. Not that it mattered, a shell had leveled the gatehouse. The defensing wall may as well have been a colander. The assault the Queen led had the daemons reeling back. Beautiful, nightmarish things with too many limbs and wicked smiles. Those once men who had fallen to chaos fought with either mindless fury or desperate cunning, but they too fell under the determined advance. Step by step, the forces of the Queen carved their way through the blood-slicked streets. The bells of the great church still tolled hollowly through the smoke haze. The ground trembled as the occasional macro-cannon shell landed from the orbital guns on Neathelm, but the intense fire had slackened. "There!" Edric pointed with his pistol. The towering spire of the church was visible across the wreckage. "We make for the square. One last push." The Queen looked back at him, then up at the sky. "You notice the bombardment has slackened?" Edric had not, but now he took stock, and it was true. The shells had fallen heavily on their approach to the city, but now they were occasional. His mind analyzed everything he knew about the orbital guns. Most of it was Godric's design. He had no part in it, but he knew their number and placement. Their positioning would allow them to obliterate the island given time. He knew they had fired on the monastery, probably to silence the planetary defense lance cannon built into the Iron Hand's fortress. Maybe they have other things to fire at in orbit. Could Tiberius or Sigibild have returned? He asked. The Queen shrugged, an expressive gesture in her silver armor. Possibly, but you are the fleet adept, not me. I just run the planet. Edric laughed. I thought Damia Voratrix ran the planet, he quipped. She looked at him. A raven told me you declared yourself here Toga, she said accusingly. Edric paused before nodding. Here Toga was an old title, meaning field commander, simply the senior officer in the literal field. Did I err, your majesty? He felt unsure. Hildelith laughed. It just occurred to me I never appointed one in my life. I guess I don't like to let go of power that easily. She tapped him on the pauldron with her saix. Consider it official, she said in seriousness. A ripple of sickly blue light shimmered across the shattered boulevards ahead, catching their attention. Edric had a sudden feeling, worse than dread, as if something terrible was approaching. A figure emerged from the direction of the market district, tall, elegant, long horns rising from her brow. A long lance was in one hand, her other cradled a burning flame of witchfire. On her belt, Edric noticed a seeks, a Wirthan weapon, strange for a daemon to carry. Hildelith gasped, and Edric turned to look at her. Cenarion, Hildelith said, awe in her voice. Dancer of the endless feast, she added. Her likeness is on the walls of the Holmbiorg. Edric looked up the ruined road. He had no desire to face such a creature. For a moment he considered withdrawal against such a foe, but he remembered he was a Wigathane. He looked back to the daemon, then addressed the Queen. His voice was deliberately calm. Would you like to introduce us, lady? He asked her. Looking back to the Neverborn, more daemons moved into the street. These creatures, though half the height of the Mistress of Whispers, were no less daunting. Thick muscles like rope, cloven-hoofed, with sleek bullheads and tall curling horns. Their blades were brass, and a second pair of bone arms spread from their backs. Tipped with long lance-like talons, decorated with golden chains and brass pendants inset with jewels and gemstones that glinted through the smoke-filled air. They were the whalebound guard, monstrous things of silvered flesh. They grinned as they walked, snorting gusts of pink and purple perfume through their nostrils and roaring in low, inhuman laughter. The Queen halted, silver javelin raised mid-command. Then Cenarion laughed, a sound like glass breaking underwater, and with a mocking bow said, Queen Kelether, ruler of Ulthanesh Tain, I assume. She bowed exaggeratedly, so pleased to make your acquaintance. Hildelith frowned, pushing back her helm. She knew daemons were just as affected by words as by blades or shot, and she was playing for time for the fleet to arrive. This one appeared to be the talking kind, and she was down to a single javelin. "I am Queen Hildelith of the world of NihtWyrtha," she announced, her voice steady. Cenarion rolled her eyes. "I believe that's what I said," she replied dryly. Then she placed the shaft of her lance into the cobbles where red grass sprouted between the stones. "I believe I knew your great-great-great." She bobbed her head side to side with mocking emphasis. "Great-great and more great-grandmother." She paused, pretending to count, then let it drop, fixing her gaze upon the queen. "A powerful seer, not one for conversation," she said, tilting her head. "I seem to recall she had more pointed ears, but I assume you bred that out." She shrugged, her smile full of cruel amusement. As they spoke, Edric signaled with battle sign to his men, who silently moved to the flanks. The commissar reappeared, dragging half a dozen men behind him. They hauled an autocannon over the broken ground. With a sharp gesture, he ordered the weapons set among the rubble near a scorched thatch-roofed building, giving it elevation. Then, grim-faced, he turned back to watch the unfolding confrontation. Hildelith stepped forward, as if unafraid of her towering adversary. Despite the demon's height, her lance, claws, horns, and monstrous presence. "Given we are still here," Hildelith said coolly, "I can only assume my forebears won the battle." Cenarion shook smoldering warp fire from her clawed hand and theatrically clutched at her throat. "That was just a flesh wound," she said, sounding genuinely offended. "I survived the encounter." Hildelith lowered her javelin slightly, adopting a ready stance. "Well, I hope I can live up to your expectations," she said, and as she spoke, her free hand flashed a quick battle sign behind her back to Edric. Edric silently disengaged the safety on his Serpenta pistol. Cenarion threw back her head and laughed, a shattering, glassy noise that made the humans closest to her wince. "We shall see," she hissed. She lit a ball of warp fire in her claw and cocked her arm to throw. The whalebound guard surged forward with guttural howls, horns lowered, weapons flashing. Hildelith dropped her visor with a snap and hurled her javelin. The silvered spear struck Cenarion in the arm with a thunderous crack. Warp fire exploded from the daemon's wound, wreathing her in green and violet flame. She shrieked in rage, untouched by the fire herself, but the nearby building caught instantly, burning fiercely. The commissar pointed his chainsword at the charging demons. "Fire!" the autocannon barked. The first shot caught the lead, whalebound square in the snout. Its face exploded in a spray of blackened flesh and demonic jelly. The second round struck another guard's shield, sending it reeling but not stopping it. The third shell slammed into a roof, scattering burning thatch over the daemon horde, igniting patches of their leathery flesh. Edric, ahead of the queen but pressed close against the shattered wall of a building, fired all 7 rounds of his Serpenta into a hulking, bull-headed beast. As the daemon stumbled, he lunged, driving his Seek's knife deep into the burning creature's chest. The daemon roared and dissolved into smoke and embers. Another daemon, larger still, rammed into him from the side, smashing Edric into the brickwork with brutal force. His body crumpled to the ground, stunned. Edric blinked, his vision swimming. He saw the Hearthguard rushing to cover the queen. The first warrior, resplendent in silver and white battle plate, was cut down by a charging bull-headed demon, its brass glaive slicing clean through armor and flesh alike. But 2 more Hearthguards closed in, wielding long hammers. One blow ricocheted harmlessly off the demon's shield, but the second hammer crushed through its head, embedding deep into the creature's broad chest. The beast shuddered and collapsed into a cloud of ash and scent. The Wigathane soldiers opened fire in disciplined Skitarii-style volleys. 7 shots from the first rank, quick and brutal. As they reloaded, the second rank stepped forward and fired, pouring a relentless storm of rounds into the charging demons. The intensity of the fire forced the whalebound guard to cluster into a crude shield wall, but even so, 2 more monsters fell, plasma fire bursting them apart into steaming ruins. Through the chaos, Queen Hildelith pushed forward. She rammed her sax into a demon's eye, drawing a noddle in the same motion and driving it deep into the beast's skull, a killing blow to anything of the mortal world. But it stuck fast in its hard skull, The demon snarled, casting her off with the blade still embedded in its head. It raised a cloven hoof to stomp her flat, only for a Hearthguard to swing his hammer with precision, striking the hilt of the buried needle. The impact drove the weapon fully through the daemon's skull. The beast burst apart in a shower of ichor and sickly perfume-scented blossoms. The surviving Hearthguards moved to shield the queen as more autocannon rounds ripped into the daemon's shield wall. Some shells bounced harmlessly from armored flesh, but others staggered their monstrous targets. A whale-bound guard reeled, just in time for a Wigathane volley to finish it, Serpenta rounds tearing it into cinders. Cenarion stepped forward, her rage clear. She hurled a ball of witchfire at the autocannon position. The men and weapon were engulfed in purple flames, their screams lost beneath the roar of battle. With a sweep of her lance, she smashed aside a Hearthguard, the warrior crumpling against the cobblestones. A second Hearthguard rushed her, only to be impaled clean through. Cenarion lifted the silver and white-clad warrior overhead on her lance, then hurled the corpse into the Wigathane line, scattering them and silencing their disciplined volleys. The whale-bound guard broke from their shield wall, charging forward laughing. Queen Hildelith fought with desperation, cutting and slashing, but with every blow she was forced to give ground. A demon lunged at her. She sidestepped smoothly, plunging her seeks into the beast's unarmored back. It gushed smoke and demonic jelly as it collapsed. But Cenarion was already upon her. The demoness thrust her lance. The blade punched through Hildelith's backplate, jutting from the front of her breastplate. The queen gasped, staring down at the bloody steel protruding from her armor. With a vicious twist, Cenarion ripped the weapon free. Hildelith staggered, barely remaining on her feet. A Hearthguard rushed to protect her, only to be skewered by Cenarion's second thrust. He sagged and fell without a sound. Cenarion advanced, her whale-bound guard cutting down the last of the queen's defenders. A wide, savage grin split the demoness's face as she closed the distance. Hildelith, clutching her shattered breastplate, blood bubbling inside her helm, refused to fall. She straightened, barely, her breath ragged, her steps uncertain. With trembling hands, she removed her helm. The crown slipped free and clattered to the cobblestones. Across from her, Cenarion laughed. The greater daemon bent low, and with the bloodied tip of her lance, lifted the fallen crown. Giggling, she placed it mockingly atop her own horned head, where it melded seamlessly with her twisted form. "Oh, you lost your pretty crown, my dear," she cooed. Her voice was cruel, musical, a sound soaked in mockery and millennia of wicked joy. She lunged, but Hildelith dashed the lance aside, struck down a demon guard, and slashed through Cenarion's barbed tail. The greater daemon shrieked, her glamour twisting in fury. Twin claws from her secondary arms lashed out. One sheared through the queen's pauldron, the other impaled her thigh. Then came the lance, driven once more into Hildelith's chest, plunging through her armor and out her back. The queen gasped, blood sprayed from her lips in a crimson arc, as Cenarion lifted her into the air, impaled like a banner. Around them, Wigathane troops faltered. Some turned and fled. Others stood frozen, like statues carved from despair. The last of the Hearthguard charged, a doomed, thunderous surge, but the demon host crashed down like a tide, breaking them apart. Cenarion's laughter echoed over the field, louder than it had in thousands of years. She felt her power rise as faith faltered and terror reigned. She had won. After all this time, she had won. Fixing her eyes on Hildelith, still twitching upon the lance, Cenarion purred. "I know it hurts, little queen. But don't despair. I know the sting of defeat too, left to drown in an endless sea of silence. But your torment won't end here. I have an ocean of pain waiting for you on my daemon world, and your screams, oh, they'll be the music of my empire. You'll be famous." Hildelith's hands trembled, then tightened around the shaft of the lance. She raised her head and smiled. "One day," she said, her voice thin but clear, "a Wigathine of NihtWyrtha will end you, and my name will be the last one you utter with your stench-filled lips. Vague word." With that, she slashed across Cenarion's face, the Seek's blade in her hand flaring bright blue, how bound by a sacred oath, sworn before a god. The weapon cut through the daemon's lip and cheek, slicing her smile wide open into a permanent, jagged grin. Cenarion screamed, reeling back in shock. Though a daemon, the wound burned. The cut was cursed, and it would not heal. She shrieked with rage. Hildelith fell, landing face down in the blood of her men. Her helmet skittered across the stone. The daemon howled in agony, then let out a cry of triumph that shook the heavens. Edric blinked through the smoke, his muscles aching, his armor cracked and sparking. He drew ragged breaths. The dent in his chest plate crushed painfully against his ribs. With a grunt of effort, he pulled the release cord. The ruined plate fell away, leaving only chainmail beneath. Gritting his teeth, he surged forward, shooting down an unsuspecting daemon that strayed too close. He reached the queen just as Cenarion lunged again. He knocked aside the greater daemon's lance tip with the flat of his seeks. Queen Hildelith looked up at him through her bloodied helm, wheezing. "Run," she coughed. Cenarion felt elated. Not just victorious. No, this was something rarer, more sacred. A triumph, a perfect performance, a symphony of her own making, now reaching its final movement. It had begun with strings, the subtle agony of whispers. Then came the horns, bold, bloody tones of war, a hymn from the choir, screams of the dying, and now the low rumble, building, toward her Aria. She raised her lance slick with royal blood, ready to skewer the last little man. Edric lowered his visor and stood. He dropped his empty pistol and raised his seeks in salute, bloodied but unbroken. "I am Edric Winfrid, son of Forthhere, Toga of the Queen's host and her sworn man. Fege word." Cenarion snarled in contempt, spitting blood from her ruined mouth. Then she struck. But before her lance could fall, bolt rounds smashed through her face, teeth shattered, a horn exploded, purple ichor sprayed across the cobbles as the demon staggered, stunned. From the smoke came a figure, a commissar, his arm gone, the stump bound with a belt cord. He marched forward, bolt pistol blazing, each round fired with deadly calm. A black coat fluttered behind him, hat still miraculously perched atop his head. He gunned down 2 deserters, a militiaman and a Wigathane. "Stand, you worthless dogs," his voxcaster roared, borrowed from a fallen guardsman. "Get off your knees and fight." Eyes turned from Cenarion to the man in black. "The queen is dead, and you run? You turn your backs. She drew blood from the greater daemon. She slew another, and you lose heart?" He spat in the Wigathane warding gesture. "You're not warriors. You're broken implements, not fit even to shovel the dung of servitors. But if you must die, then die as sons of NihtWyrtha, in the name of the Emperor, the Queen, and the world she gave her life for." Figured. Silence followed. Then, a cry. Men turned. A handful charged. Wigathan, militia, dock workers. One man swung a shovel. A boy with only a seeks leapt at Cenarion's flank, and then they all followed. Old women and children emerged from the warrens, beating daemons with pans, sticks, and rusted blades. The daemon host howled as they were swarmed. Cenarion hissed, lashing out, slaying 6 with each strike. Edric lunged and grabbed her lance with both hands. She kicked him away, but the shaft snapped. She screamed in fury. And then the jets came. A thunderous roar overhead as 3 Skyhunter jet bikes vaulted the ruined wharf. The lead rider, Wulfgar, dismounted midair, his Crozius crackling as it crushed a whale-bound guard's skull like a melon. Behind him, a space marine in black Iron Hands armor raked the enemy with bolter fire, then drove a chain-blade bayonet into a demon's gut and blew its head off at point-blank range. Absalon, the red-armored deacon, landed last. His eviscerator split a demon in 2, ichor soaking his robes until they were crimson black. "He who sits upon the throne watches your deeds today," he intoned. Cenarion shrieked, staggering as a Wigathane soldier clung to her thigh, stabbing again and again with a broken blade. She looked up and saw Wulfgar approaching. She hissed, reached for her own seeks, but the light changed. A shadow fell over her. The orbital barrage from Nithelm had stopped. "No," she whispered. She turned and saw her host, her whale-bound guard, the core of her army, being torn apart. This battle was lost, but the war was hers to shape. Wulfgar hauled Edric to his feet and tossed him a fresh pistol. Together they advanced. Cenarion stood tall, her hooves in a pool of blood that shimmered like a mirror. She smiled at them, almost warmly. "Until next time," she whispered, and with a mocking wave she dropped backward into the reflection, vanishing like a stone into still water. Wulfgar and Edric stood in silence, the crackling fires behind them throwing long shadows across the street. At their backs, the harbor smoldered. Turning back, the deacon knelt beside the fallen queen, while the commissar, arm bound tight at the stump, barked orders with ruthless efficiency, rallying the broken mass of militia and civilians. Hildelith lay cradled in Wulfgar's arms, her breastplate shattered, her skin pale beneath blood and soot. She stirred, her eyes fluttered open, catching the green glow of Wulfgar's skull-masked helm. For a moment she smiled. "You got what you wanted, chaplain," she rasped, voice thin as fog. Wulfgar shook his head. "No, lady," he said softly, voice thick through his vox. "I never wanted this, and it's Scop, not chaplain." She chuckled weakly, then lifted one gloved hand and ran a finger down his mask, leaving a streak of crimson. Her lips parted again, as if to speak, but the words never came. Her body went limp. Wulfgar held her a moment longer, then lowered her gently to the cobblestones. He bowed his head, and for a brief instant said nothing. Beyond the cries of the wounded and the barking of officers, the only sound that carried was the steady toll of the church bell, high above Suthi Hill. He rose, turned, and looked toward the hill. The market square still burned. The battle was not yet over. "Edric," he said without turning. "Lord," came the answer. Wulfgar's voice was quiet but clear. "We have a world to defend. Let's be about it." He turned to the deacon. Absalom stood without speaking, the eviscerator at rest but ready. The three warriors exchanged no oath, no ritual. They simply marched, up the hill toward fire and duty. Behind them, the commissar took his place beside the queen's body, standing sentinel with pistol in hand. He did not flinch. He did not weep. The people followed, a tide of wounded and wrathful souls, up the slope behind the three warriors. And still the church bell tolled, calling them not to prayer but to war.